Social Development Minister Lindiwe Zulu has urged South Africans to take a stand against women abuse, which has seen an increase. Well, the minister joins me now. Minister Lindiwe Zulu, good evening, and thank you so much for your time. Of course, Minister, we're talking about how important it is that we as a country are able to take a step against gender-based violence. And I'm looking at organizations that play a crucial role when it comes to gender-based violence. And these are shelters that would fall under your department. And yet it seems that they have been the least considered when it comes to funding. And many of them are really going through difficult times right now with very little support from government. Why is that?
Kathy, let me start from where we need to start. We need to start from a point that indicates that South Africa cannot continue to carry this image of being a country that actually has the highest numbers of gender-based violence and femicide. And today I learned a new word called filicide. So it's the killing of women, the killing of girls. It's got a name. I didn't know that it's got a name. So before we even get to the point of who is being funded and who is not being funded, let us start with the challenge and the problem itself, that there's a societal problem facing us that is of gender-based violence and femicide. There is something that we need to do collectively as a community, as a nation. And so before we even get to what government is doing in terms of the shelters that we are talking about, let us make the call to our communities, to our families, to everybody to say, don't close your ears and your eyes when you see it happening. Don't allow it even in your own home when it starts with a small little thing and then it grows to something big. Then to your question, again, I want to say that it cannot be that we begin to be a proud nation about the number of shelters that we are building all over the country. We should be building less shelters and giving more support to families. But however, because of the rate and the numbers of women who are being abused, we are forced and pushed into having more and more shelters. That is what we need to work towards. Let us fund the shelters that are there, and government is funding those shelters. And I repeat again that this government spends 7.9 billion rands per year in supporting NPOs and NGOs. What we need to do is to make sure that we go and check what actually is happening in those shelters. Are those shelters adequate? And as you rightfully say, the shelters are not adequate, and including what happens in the shelters is not adequate. Hence, the president has already indicated to us as the Department of Social Development, working with other departments, that we need to increase the number of shelters, but we also need to increase the Kuselega centers where women and children can come and be processed without being abused now, second time being asked a whole lot of questions about how did it happen? Where did it happen? Why did it happen? So yes, I agree with you. The shelters are not adequate, but I don't think that we should be a nation that's proud of just building shelters all over. Let's deal with the cause of the problem. Let's deal with the behavioral change that needs to happen. Let's deal with empowering women in order for them to be able to walk out when they are being abused. And if they have to take their children along, they must take their children along.
Minister, I don't think that it's a case of necessarily being proud of the fact that there should be shelters built all over the country. But I think it's acknowledging the depth of the problem that South Africa is really in when it comes to gender-based violence. We know that often shelters become the only place that survivors of gender-based violence can run to. And when we then are underfunding these shelters, it means that we're creating less options for women who do want to walk out of abusive relationships, because often there are different power dynamics at play, and people are unable to, in some instances, be able to fully care for themselves in a particular moment, and they would need that support in order to get up on their feet. And that's part of what the role of your shelter is doing. Now, when these are underfunded, it effectively means that many women are left without a place to go to. And that in and of itself undermines the message that government, including yourself, would want to spread during this period. Because it's one thing to say we're fighting against gender-based violence, but when we look at the reality on the ground, it certainly doesn't speak to that enthusiasm.
Kathy, I will go back to it again. We are not underfunding shelters. The ones that we are aware of, the ones that there's been a fully agreement that they are complying, the ones that apply and they are approved, we give them as per agreement as to how much money can we spread across. Because remember, we have to spread across the money from national, and the money gets sent to provinces, because we believe, and I personally believe, the immediate response should not be a response just at national. It must be a response at provincial and at local. Hence, the money that gets to the department then gets distributed to the different provinces. We want to fund as many shelters as we possibly can, but we also cannot run away from the fact that it would be better for us to have less and less of women being abused, having to run away from their homes. It has to also be important to say that if we can be able to support communities, house to house, street to street, community to community, even the shelters that we are supporting as government, it's important for them to be supported by the communities where they live. I'm not disputing the fact that we are not having adequate resources, but I'm saying the resources that we have, where we have to distribute it, we have been distributing the resources. But the demand is growing and growing. And the demand is growing because on the rise of the violence against women and children, and especially now during this COVID-19, we've actually had a rise on the number of women that have to get out of their own homes. So I'm not disputing, Kathy, neither am I reducing the importance of having to fund the shelters. I'm not reducing that, but all I'm saying, as a nation, we should have and make sure that women and children are protected at home, protected from the streets, protected by communities, so that even the money that we are spending, it should be money that we are spending in empowering women so that they can be able to stand on their own 2 feet. That's why when we fund the shelters that we have, we make sure that it's not just getting women to the shelters. It is about how do you help them to change their lives? How do we empower them to either start their businesses, small businesses? How do you empower them to even train them so that they can go and get jobs, so that they can stand on their own 2 feet? That's what I'm trying to say, Kathy, without undermining the need for us to fund the shelters and fund them adequately.
Social Development Minister Lindiwe Zulu. Unfortunately, that's where we're going to have to leave it tonight, for tonight at least, but certainly more conversations with her as we mark this period in the country.